Okay, so if you're an executive, maybe an entrepreneur, or honestly, even just someone really curious trying to figure out today's business world, you're probably feeling completely overwhelmed. There's just this flood of information, right? About risk, security, vendors, supply chains. It's a lot, almost paralyzing. So our mission today is to take that huge stack of sources, the white papers, research studies, practical guides, and kind of boil it all down. We want to have a single, really practical conversation. We're doing a deep dive into securing businesses, focusing on two, well, pretty different but equally vital areas. First up, we're going granular. Ground level security. We're talking about the free foundational cybersecurity tools you can actually install, like right now. And maybe more importantly, the often shocking true cost of getting up to modern compliance standards. Then, second, we'll zoom out, way out. To the macro level, we'll tackle that huge systemic risk that comes with complex global supply chains. And for that, we're using the ultimate test case, really the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll analyze how the smartest businesses shifted away from just pure efficiency and actually learned to thrive despite massive disruption. The core tension here, the thing we're really exploring, is this dual challenge. Protecting your business means both, installing some software on maybe an old laptop and also managing this incredibly complex, maybe fragile global network of partners and suppliers, some of whom you might not even know exist.
That's absolutely spot on. We really need to move past just theoretical ideas and get into real actionable strategies. We'll cover that shift from, reactive annual compliance scrambles, remember those, to continuous monitoring platforms. That fundamentally changes the whole cost picture for security. And critically, when we look externally, we're diving into vendor risk management, VRM, and this idea of nth party risk. That's the vulnerability cascading down, through your vendors. Our sources lay out clear strategic ways to build resilience, not just check boxes. And this is backed by empirical evidence, data gathered right after that huge global disruption. We're really dissecting that strategic move from just efficiency to, well, robust adaptability.
Right. Let's kick off with the low-hanging fruit, where every business really has to start protecting their own devices, their applications. If you're running a small business, or maybe you're an exec trying to set a security budget, you might feel, well, pretty intimidated by the cost of those big enterprise solutions. But the good news, from what we're seeing in the source material, is that you can build a solid security baseline using essential, high-quality, free tools, like straight away.
Yeah, it's about seeing security as a process,
Right.
right? Not just a product you buy. And that process, it absolutely has to be multi-layered. Just relying on, say, a basic firewall or one antivirus program, that's really just asking for trouble. The initial layer needs to be foundational and broad, cover multiple angles.
Okay, let's get specific then. For that basic sort of passive protection, the simplest thing is a reliable antivirus. Our sources point to Bitdefender Antivirus Free Edition. Seems like a strong starting point. Download, install, basic protection. Done. But if you want that multi-layer defense from one install, maybe look at Avira Free Security.
Avira is a great example of squeezing maximum value from free tools. That suite isn't just antivirus. It often bundles in a firewall manager, a basic VPN for safer browsing, even a password manager. So right there, you've tackled three big vulnerabilities: malicious files, dodgy network connections, weak passwords. That's a powerful start for, well, zero budget.
Okay, baseline established. Now we need to go on the offensive, right? Find problems already hiding on the system or network. Malwarebytes Free comes up here. Critical for running those deep, on-demand system scans, cleaning up anything the passive stuff might have missed. But here's where it gets really interesting for anyone wanting to truly understand what's happening on their network. Wireshark.
Oh, Wireshark. Yeah, that's an essential power tool, a must-have for IT security folks, and it's open source, totally free. It's a network protocol analyzer. Think of it like a digital stethoscope for your network traffic. It lets you capture, dissect, really analyze data traffic in real time. For an IT pro, that capability is just immense.
So it's not just for figuring out why the internet's slow.
Not at all. I mean, it can do that, but its real value is deep network monitoring. You can spot weird traffic patterns, unauthorized connection attempts, maybe ports being used when they shouldn't be. Often, you can actually detect a potential intrusion or a vulnerability before it blows up into a full breach. Knowing what's normal for your network is the first step to spotting the abnormal.
Good point. And thinking about the attack surface, web applications are always high on the list, aren't they? Often due to simple misconfigurations. For that, we've got the OWASP Z Attack Proxy, or ZAP.
Right, ZAP. Think of it as your automated security guard that you run against your own website or app. It's free, open source, a DAS-tooled dynamic application security testing. It basically pokes and prods your web app, looking for those common, easy-to-exploit vulnerabilities. Things like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, XSS, insecure file uploads. These are exactly the kinds of flaws that automated bots and attackers hunt for. ZAP lets you find and fix them on your own terms, not theirs.
And finally, adding something like OSCC brings in that logging and monitoring piece, watching for suspicious activity across systems. So the sources are pretty clear. You can build surprisingly sophisticated, multi-layered security stack, mostly from free, high-quality tools.
And that really throws cold water on the myth that good foundational security needs a massive upfront investment.
Exactly. But, and this is a big but, this leads us straight into the harsh budget reality. Moving from these free tools to actually achieving formal standards like the UK's Cyber Essentials certification, which is pretty representative of baseline standards globally, well, that often brings a massive, unexpected cost shock.
That's the pivot point, isn't it? The cost isn't usually the certificate itself. That's often quite modest. The real financial hit comes during what they call the discovery phase. You start running proper vulnerability scanning tools, maybe costing a few £100s a month, and suddenly you uncover the uncomfortable truth about your aging infrastructure.
And the sources single out one thing as the biggest shock.
Hardware replacement. It's the financial hammer blow. It forces businesses, especially smaller ones, to scramble. Our sources show, for a typical 15-employee SMB aiming for compliance, the total remediation cost, not just the certificate, can be staggering. We're talking £10,340 to £18,300.
Wow, that's a huge amount for a small business, especially if they thought they were saving money by keeping older kid. If the software is cheap or free, where on earth is all that money going?
It's the physical debt. The technical debt built up over years of not refreshing IT assets. Many organizations are still running old operating systems, Windows 7, 8, maybe unsupported versions of Windows 10. The core problem is these older machines, the actual desktops and laptops, often just cannot be upgraded to meet the modern security requirements of current OSs like Windows 11.
Why not? What's a specific technical blocker causing all this hardware to become obsolete?
It usually boils down to two specific hardware bits. Lack of TPM 2.0, that's the Trusted Platform module, and lack of UEFI support, which replaced the old BIOS. TPM 2.0 is basically a dedicated security chip. It handles hardware-based encryption, key generation. It's fundamental to Windows 11 security because it checks the OS integrity when the machine boots up.
Oh, okay.
Without TPM 2.0, you don't have that essential hardware root of trust. Without UEFI, you're missing modern secure boot capabilities. So if a business suddenly finds it has to replace, say, 5 or 10 machines because of this, at maybe £800 for a desktop, £1,000 for a laptop, bam, you're instantly looking at 4 or 5, maybe £10,000, and that's before you've even fixed a single software issue.
So it's a physical requirement for modern security, not just a software patch. And frankly, if a business is still running Windows 7 well, now, isn't that kind of an indictment of past management? Are these compliance costs just making them finally pay for years of neglect, accumulated technical debt?
That's precisely the critical point the sources bring up. It highlights a major failure in management specifically, failing to budget for lifecycle replacement. They weren't really saving money. They were just racking up risk. The discovery phase often throws this into sharp relief, finding maybe 20–30% of computers are obsolete, network gear is ancient, critical apps running on operating systems that haven't seen a security patch in years.
Yeah. And layering on top of that financial hit is the human element. The sources call these self-inflicted vulnerabilities.
Oh, absolutely. And the stats here are frankly terrifying because they point straight at us people. We know something like 68% of all data breaches involve some kind of non-malicious human interaction, and a huge 95% involve human error in some form, misconfigurations, clicking the wrong link, simple mistakes.
And a classic example.
Default passwords. It comes up again and again as the fix everything phase. You might have secured your main servers perfectly, but did someone change the default admin password on that old router? Or the network switch? What about the Office IoT coffee machine? Or even the printer? Vulnerability scanners are ruthless. They flag those known default credentials instantly because, well, attackers know people forget. Human negligence is the easiest door to open.
Okay, so this inherent risk driven by old hardware and human mistakes, it makes the old way of doing security, that annual panic before the audit, completely unsustainable. What's the strategic answer?
The big shift is from reactive annual compliance to continuous monitoring. The old way was that frantic, expensive scramble just before renewal time, right?
Okay.
Hiring consultants, running scans, patching under pressure, which, by the way, leaves the business wide open for the other 364 days of the year.
Right.
Continuous monitoring platforms in our sources mention examples costing around, say, £5 to £7 per endpoint per month. They change the game. Security becomes ongoing management, not an annual burden. It pulls security left, integrating it into daily operations. This proactive approach gives you immediate visibility. You know right away when a patch is needed, when a configuration changes unexpectedly, or when a new vulnerability pops up. And crucially, the sources emphasize this. The cost of continuous management is significantly less than cleaning up after a single security incident, or even just the cost and stress of that annual fire drill.
Okay, so once we've tried to lock down our own house, the endpoints, the configurations, address the human element as best we can, we immediately run into the next problem, the security of everyone else we deal with. Which brings us squarely into vendor risk management, or VRM.
VRM is absolutely vital in today's interconnected world. The core principle is basically trust but verify.
Hmm.
You need a comprehensive, systemic way to identify, assess, and then mitigate the risks that come with any third-party vendor who touches your data, your finances, or your critical operations.
And the risk doesn't just stop with the vendor you have the contract with, your direct first-tier supplier. That's often the easy one to check, right? We have to talk about the growing headache of fourth-party risk, sometimes called nth-party risk. This seems to be where some of the biggest systemic breaches originate.
It's that cascading vulnerability effect. So imagine your company uses a SaaS platform for, say, HR. That platform is your third party. But what if that SaaS platform relies on a specific cloud provider for hosting? Or maybe they use an unvetted subprocessor for doing data analytics. Those are your fourth parties. Now, if that fourth party gets breached, maybe through a simple misconfiguration on their end, your data is exposed instantly. Even though you have zero direct relationship, no contract with them, it creates this sort of invisible risk surface stretching across the entire supply chain. Managing that complexity, just knowing who has access to your data 3 or 4 steps removed, and trying to ensure compliance down the line. So one of the biggest challenges in modern security, honestly.
And dealing with that kind of dynamic, cascading risk, figuring out which links in that chain are weak, which partners are actually secure, that surely needs more than just spreadsheets and sending out questionnaires once a year.
Oh, absolutely. Simple tools just can't cope with that level of complexity and change.
It feels like you need specialized visibility tools, maybe some real expertise here. And actually, this seems like a really good moment to highlight the value of resources designed exactly for this challenge. For organizations grappling with that intense fourth-party risk problem, trying to set up robust due diligence. We should mention the platforms available through our sponsors. You can check out vrm.cisomarketplace.services and vendorscope.cisomarketplace.com. These kinds of tools aim to provide that necessary framework and visibility mapping, monitoring, and helping mitigate risk across those complex vendor ecosystems we're discussing.
Good point. And shifting back to the strategic importance of VRM, let's look at an expert view. Rajiv Ranjan, an ISO lead auditor, puts it nicely. He says, implementing a VRM framework is, quote, not merely a compliance exercise, but a strategic decision aligning business goals with tangible outcomes.
Okay, aligning business goals with tangible outcomes. That makes it sound like VRM should deliver some kind of ROI, not just be a cost center for ticking boxes. So how does a company actually build this robust strategic framework? It sounds less like an IT project and more like, well, a whole business transformation.
It is absolutely cross-functional, and it needs, according to the sources, 4 essential non-negotiable steps. Starting right at the top, step 1, leadership buy-in and policies. You must get defined, documented support from senior execs, the board, IT and security leaders, legal, procurement, everyone. If your security policies aren't actually enforced by procurement during vendor selection or by legal in the contracts, they're basically just paper collecting dust.
That links right back to what you said earlier about security getting stuck in an IT silo. If legal isn't negotiating the right to audit and procurement's just picking the cheapest vendor, the whole VRM idea falls apart instantly.
Exactly. Which brings us to step 2, forming a cross-functional team. You get a dedicated VRM team. They be clear rules, clear communication lines, and it has to draw expertise from IT, legal, finance, compliance, maybe operations, depending on the vendor. This team is the engine that turns those high-level policies into the detailed procedures the organization actually uses day to day.
Okay, policy and team in place. What's next? The actual work.
Step 3, The hands-on part, due diligence and contractual safeguards. This have to happen before you onboard a vendor, not after. Due diligence can't just be a rubber stamp. It needs to be an active assessment of their security posture. What controls do they really have? And critically, the contract needs teeth. You need strong safeguards written in. Things like explicitly reserving the right to audit the vendor systems. And crucially important for that nth-party risk, demanding breach notification requirements that cover breaches of the vendor's fourth parties too. That's key. Finally, within this step, you need to build vendor diversification into your strategy. Avoid putting all your critical eggs in one vendor basket.
That diversification point is huge, especially thinking about supply chains. Okay, what about step 4, the ongoing part?
Step 4 is continuous monitoring and assessment. Risk isn't static, it decays. A vendor who looks secure today might become insecure tomorrow because they change something internally or they onboard a new, risky sub-processor. So you need to regularly assess their performance, their security posture. It's not a one-and-done check.
And how do you manage that continuous assessment without drowning in data?
The central tool for this is often the vendor risk matrix. It's a way to visualize and prioritize risks. You typically map vendors based on two things: the likelihood of a risk event happening with them and the potential impact on your business if it does. You also categorize vendors by criticality. Is this vendor handling payroll that's high impact, or are they just providing office cleaning services? Probably lower impact. So a risk that's low likelihood but potentially catastrophic if it happens, like your single cloud hosting provider going down, needs much more attention than a high likelihood but low impact risk, maybe minor configuration issues on a non-critical marketing tool. This constant prioritization keeps the VRM framework alive and focused on what truly matters. It stops it from becoming just static paperwork.
Okay, we've gone from the individual laptop to the immediate partner or vendor. Now let's zoom out to the biggest operational challenge imaginable: the systemic failure of the entire global supply chain. And as we said, COVID-19 is the defining example here.
Absolutely. COVID was the ultimate stress test, wasn't it? It wasn't just a localized problem. It was a global synchronized shock, what researchers call a low-frequency high-impact, or LFHI, disruption. And it proved, quite brutally, how fragile systems built purely for cost efficiency really were. Traditional risk models, planning for a flood in one region or maybe minor political unrest somewhere, they just couldn't cope with something on this scale.
We all remember the immediate effects, right? The empty shelves, the panic-buying toilet paper, PPE, the desperate scramble for essential items. What fundamental weakness in global logistics did that whole crisis expose?
It really laid bare the vulnerability of the just-in-time fulfillment model. For decades, the absolute mantra was cut inventory, minimize costs, ensure things arrive exactly when needed, not before, which works beautifully until demand goes completely haywire overnight. And simultaneously, supply just vanishes because of lockdowns, factory closures, transport grinding to a halt. The system had absolutely no buffer, no slack, and that led directly to those severe supply-demand imbalances and, inevitably some pretty nasty opportunistic price gouging.
It felt completely chaotic.
It operated within what researchers term the VUCA environment. That stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity.
Okay, let's unpack VUCA quickly, because those words sound academic, but they perfectly describe the reality of that panic, didn't they?
They really did. Volatility was the sheer speed and magnitude of change. Demand for masks jumping 1,000% overnight while the factories making them were shut down. Uncertainty was the complete lack of knowledge about how long it would last. 6 weeks, 6 months, a year. No one knew. Complexity came from all the interconnected global factors hitting at once. Border closures stopping trucks, public health rules changing labor availability, consumers suddenly buying different things, all happening simultaneously. And ambiguity was the lack of any clear precedent or obvious solution. For weeks, maybe months, nobody really knew the right thing to do. Prediction became impossible, and that made traditional business planning totally obsolete.
So when prediction is out the window, where do organizations even look for guidance? Our source material points to 2 specific theories that guided research into resilience during this time.
That's right. The first is resilience theory, RT. This isn't just about bouncing back to how things were. RT focuses on the capacity of a system like a business to absorb disturbances and then reorganize to a new, potentially more desirable state. For the execs listening, this means focusing on internal adaptive capabilities. Things like adaptive leadership, cross-training your staff so they can switch roles, being able to rapidly retool processes. It's about being engineered internally for flexibility.
Okay, internal strength. What's the second theory?
Second is resource dependency theory, RDT. This one focuses on managing your external dependencies. Because during a crisis, companies become heavily reliant on resources from outside. Think about getting government aid, or negotiating for priority shipping slots when capacity is scarce, or finding new suppliers for essential components overnight. RDT emphasizes managing those external relationships and diversifying where you get critical resources from.
So RD is about building a strong inner core, how we adapt inside. RDT is about making sure we have strong external lifelines. Makes sense. And when we look at the recovery process itself, there's an ideal path, isn't there? We can kind of visualize it.
Yes, exactly. Companies tend to move through stages, respond, the initial shock, recover, getting back on track, and hopefully thrive, reaching a new level. In a low resilience scenario, the performance drop during the respond phase is really steep and the recover phase is long and slow. Maybe they never even get back to where they started. The goal for high resilience firms, and the data backs this up, is twofold. Achieve a much faster recovery time and significantly dampen that initial performance drop. So recover quickly and ultimately reach a better level of performance than before the crisis hit.
Which leads us to a really critical strategic conclusion from the research. The winners, the companies who recovered fastest and did best, they used a hybrid strategy.
Absolutely. The hybrid strategy is the key takeaway. It acknowledges that planning alone isn't enough because you can't predict a VUCA event perfectly. But just reacting chaotically doesn't work either. It's this blend of proactive measures, things you do before the disruption hits, like building readiness, having defenses in place, and reactive efforts, how you respond after the disruption, which requires rapid diagnosis, finding alternatives, maybe exploring totally novel solutions you hadn't considered before. You need both. You need the built-in planning and the agility to pivot instantly when the plan goes out the window.
Okay, let's dig into the specifics now. Looking at that empirical study from the Australian retail sector, focusing on essential businesses like groceries, pharmacies,
Yeah.
what reactive strategies did they say were most critical for just immediate survival?
Yeah, the data paints a clear picture of a dominant toolkit. Right at the top, interestingly, were the twin concepts of flexibility, cited by 18.1%, and adaptability, 17.6%. And it's actually important to understand the difference between them.
Okay, flexibility first.
Flexibility is about being able to easily bend and modify your short-term operations. So, examples from this study included things like physically reorganizing store layouts, creating COVID-essential aisles versus non-COVID aisles, or developing really agile logistics, maybe using alternative unconventional transport routes to get around roadblocks. It's about quickly adjusting the resources you already have.
And adaptability is different how?
Adaptability is deeper. It's the capacity to modify your resources and even your core structures in response to long-term systemic changes. It's more of a fundamental organizational shift. Examples here include things like completely redefining job roles, like procurement managers suddenly having to source entirely new types of products. Or the big one, fundamentally shifting the entire business model to operate remotely at scale, almost overnight. Adaptability is structural change. Flexibility is operational adjustment.
Got it. Following close behind those were strategies focused on external relationships, which fits perfectly with that resource dependency theory you mentioned.
It's exactly right. We saw supply chain collaboration, 14.5%, and visibility, 14.3%, cited really heavily. Collaboration meant purposeful integration and, critically, information sharing with key partners up and down the chain. For the pharmaceutical companies, this meant building really tight relationships with senior doctors to understand real-time demand shifts for medicines. For the big grocery chains, it meant partnering up with global logistics providers, not just for visibility, but also to gain clout, to get priority access to scarce shipping containers or air freight slots.
And visibility, that's more than just knowing where your own stock is in the warehouse, right? It sounds like end-to-end knowledge.
It absolutely is. True visibility means mapping your suppliers by tier, knowing who your direct suppliers are, but also who their key manufacturers are, and maybe even where their raw materials come from. That's how you spot hidden risks deep in the chain. It also meant investing in tracking technology, things like RFID, advanced logistics software. Not just for internal efficiency, but also to give customers a clearer, more accurate picture of where their order is. That helps manage expectations and maintain trust when everything feels uncertain.
And you couldn't do any of this rapid flexing or collaborating without technology, I imagine. That was cited just behind visibility.
Yep. Use of digital technology, 13.7%, was highlighted as a massive accelerator. The pandemic basically forced years' worth of digital transformation into a matter of months for many. This included that huge sudden shift to omnichannel retailing, trying to seamlessly blend the physical store experience with online shopping and delivery. It also meant speeding up the adoption of more sophisticated tools using AI and IoT for better inventory management, forecasting demand in real time, using advanced transport management systems, TMS, for better control and visibility over logistics. Technology basically went from being a back-office support function to the absolute operational core for survival and recovery.
Okay, let's flip now to the proactive side of that hybrid strategy. What were the longer-term, more strategic changes that companies either had planned already or maybe rapidly put in place to make sure the next big shock doesn't wipe them out?
A really big theme here was increasing innovativeness. And this wasn't just tweaking things, it was often quite strategic disruption. We saw firms actively shifting where they made things, companies consciously moving away from relying solely on China, for instance, and developing new relationships with local manufacturers or manufacturers in different regions. This was often driven by pure necessity at first, but it quickly became a planned strategic hedge against future disruption.
And that connects directly to that huge geopolitical lesson that came out of this, diversification.
The sources are pretty blunt about this. Over-reliance on single geographic sources, especially China, for manufacturing inputs, literally caused some businesses to fail. We saw quotes like businesses having to lay people off and go broke because they could not get stuff into the country, just couldn't get the parts. So this strategic, proactive response was to mandate regionalizing supply chains, deliberately increasing local sourcing, ensuring you have multiple suppliers, ideally in different geopolitical zones. Yes, this kind of proactive hedging often costs more upfront, but the pandemic showed it's essentially buying insurance against catastrophic failure.
And the government played a much bigger role than usual in helping businesses through this, didn't it? That came up as well.
Absolutely. Government collaboration was cited as a crucial element, particularly on the proactive recovery side. Those public-private partnerships really proved their worth. Government initiatives, things like financial aid, tax breaks, but also regulations designed specifically to allow businesses to be more agile, maybe relaxing certain rules temporarily. They allowed companies to pivot faster than they could have otherwise. The study found that firms that trusted and quickly acted on government directives, which were often quite business-friendly in their intent, tended to recover more rapidly. It really showed the power of a synchronized response between public and private sectors in a systemic crisis.
Okay, and finally, we have to loop back to security, but maybe in a broader strategic context now. Building security.
Yes. And here, building security had kind of a dual meaning in the context of recovery. While yes, it includes physical security against things like theft during chaos, it primarily emphasized leveraging technology as the foundation for recovery itself. So, cyber resilience, data integration. These weren't just about defense anymore. They were about enabling the visibility, the flexibility, the collaboration we talked about earlier. Security, in this sense, becomes an enabler of speed and adaptation, not just something that blocks risk or slows things down.
That makes sense. As businesses come out of a shock this big, the way they measure success has to change too, right? You can't just focus on cost reduction like before. How did this show up in new KPIs, new performance indicators?
That's a key point. The sources highlight that many companies started tracking KPIs they'd previously undervalued or maybe even ignored entirely. The goal shifted away from purely minimizing cost towards valuing what you might call robust efficiency.
So what did successful recovery look like in terms of metrics?
It was things like maintaining or even increasing profit margins despite the disruption, showing real operational control. Significant improvement in inventory accuracy, because you can't be flexible if you don't actually know what you have and where it is. Getting back to high service levels, like hitting mid-90s% for on-time delivery, and significantly, the successful initiation of major digitalization and tracking projects after the crisis began, showing a commitment to long-term improvement. These kinds of KPIs demonstrate a commitment to both speed and security, efficiency and robustness.
So it sounds like the risk management culture is no longer this separate thing you do once a year. It has to be baked into the everyday operations now.
It absolutely has to be. That's the final overarching lesson, really. Risk management needs to be internalized, embedded into daily operations, not treated as some kind of annual reactive compliance chore. And this demands continuous improvement, continuous adaptation, recognizing that normal is always changing, and that every single investment, whether it's in technology and people and partnerships, it has to be viewed through the lens of building long-term resilience. #tag outro trash show.
Wow. Okay, so this deep dive has really covered the full spectrum, hasn't it? We went from the most granular level, like the free antivirus you put on one laptop, and that specific hardware failure caused by needing TPM 2.0, all the way up to the massive systemic challenge of managing nth-party vendor risk and how businesses survived, or didn't, through a global shock like COVID-19.
And the synthesis seems really clear. The future belongs to that hybrid strategy. It's that blend of proactive planning and reactive adaptability. Things like operational flexibility, deeper structural adaptability, embracing digital technology, fostering strategic collaboration. That mix is the absolute new imperative for surviving and growing sustainably.
And as we explored just how complex managing those multi-tiered vendor relationships can be, especially that tricky fourth-party risk, it's pretty obvious that specialized tools become almost essential to get that crucial end-to-end visibility. So we definitely want to thank our sponsors again for providing resources that are critical for navigating exactly these kinds of digital challenges. For those of you listening who are looking to manage complex vendor ecosystems, manage strategic risks effectively, get that continuous monitoring and verification that a proper VRM program needs, we encourage you to check out the platforms at vrm.cisomarketplace.services and vendorscope.cisomarketplace.com.
Definitely worth exploring. And, in closing, that COVID crisis, it didn't just disrupt businesses temporarily. It fundamentally changed business strategy. We've seen that the old way of thinking, that choice between cost efficiency or resilience, it's basically a false choice now. You have to integrate both. The goal isn't just getting back to the old normal. As one manager put it so well during the crisis, something like, we've never seen a disruption like this. We're not going back to normal when normal was already in crisis.
That's powerful.
It is. So the provocative thought, maybe to leave everyone with, tying this whole discussion together, is this. We know 95% of data breaches involve human error or misconfiguration. We know large-scale systemic disruptions will happen again. Given that, where in your organization are you currently investing in awareness, training, and education, building that human firewall to actually match the significant investment you're probably being forced to make in new hardware and software? Because sustainable long-term resilience, it really begins and ends with the continuous vigilance and capability of your people.